The CFA Institute has released another video to explain the changes in the pass rates that we've seen so far this year. But this time, they specifically mention something that they've always kept under wraps, which is the minimum passing score. And this sounds great, right? Like they're finally telling us why the minimum passing scores have been so high recently. No, not really. The majority of the video was spent explaining what many of us already knew, which is how they set the standards for the grading of each of the CFA exams. Only in the end of the video do they get into what we're most curious about, which is those minimum passing scores. But their explanation might leave you more confused than you were before you watched the video. We're gonna watch the video together, but then more importantly, we'll dig into some of the potential interpretations of what the CFA Institute is actually saying here. Okay, this intro music is way better than the PBS Kids music they used in the last video. Hats off to the production crew over at the CFA Institute.
Hi, I'm Chris Wiese. In a previous episode focusing on CFA program pass rates, we told you that the CFA Institute does not use a forced curve in our examinations, and instead, we strive to hold a consistent difficulty level across our exams. Let me explain now how we set that difficulty level. We follow the most commonly used and widely accepted method among credentialing bodies. It's called the Modified Angoff Standard Setting Method. The process starts with a description of the Just Qualified Candidate, or JQC. This conceptual candidate has a score that is just barely high enough to pass the exam.
That just qualified candidate is what many of us, myself in YouTube videos, many people on Reddit who have talked about this before, when describing this Angoff standard setting method, call a minimally qualified candidate.
The JQC statement is something that standard setters receive that explains to them what a passing candidate needs to minimally know and be able to do in order to pass the exam at each level of the program. The standard setting process begins with a group of about 24 CFA charter holders. We recruit from all regions, career levels, and a cross-section of industries to make sure this group is as diverse as our candidate pool. Standard setters go question by question through the exam, and for each question, they indicate whether they think the JQC will or will not get the answer correct.
We know.
For a very tough question, most standard setters will indicate the JQC would get it wrong. And for an extremely easy question, most would indicate that candidates will indeed answer correctly. We then aggregate those judgments together to determine an implied recommended MPS or cut score.
This is how they've always done it.
The Governors receives the recommendation of the standard setters along with all supporting statistics. And at this point, the board can accept the standard setters' recommendation, or they may request adjustments be made. For example, many of you are familiar with the ethics adjustment. Given that the decision makers on the board are CFA charter holders themselves, our experience has been that they believe in the process.
They believe in the process. That's some real feel-good lingo right there. Thanks.
Standard setting is conducted every couple of years to affirm our assumption of the JQC and that it remains valid relative to things like changes in the curriculum or long-term candidate demographic shifts.
To interject really quickly, I have no idea what he means by long-term candidate demographic shifts. Now, I don't think that statement was the main point of this video, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but he's basically saying they will shift the standard by which they measure candidates to depending on how the quality or the score of candidates changes over time. My guess is that candidates are smarter or at least prepare better now than they did like 50 years ago, but maybe I'm biased because I'm alive now rather than 50 years ago. Who knows?
Between standard settings, we use a process called equating. The equating process adjusts for any differences in the relative difficulty from one exam form to another, and then we apply that same MPS across the administration.
Here's where things get weird. What the heck does equating mean, and what does exam form mean?
Those of us writing these exams are charter holders, and we understand how hard this test is. Not all of us passed the exams on our first attempt, But we absolutely want you to pass, and we want you to pass for the right reasons. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get notifications of when future episodes of Inside the CFA program are released. We plan to do a full series of these to provide you with what you've been asking for. More transparency.
So I like to think I played a bit of a part in encouraging the Institute to provide that transparency that we've been asking for, which feels pretty cool. The biggest point of confusion with this video is in the use of that word adjustment. Let's watch that little clip one more time and listen carefully to what he says here.
Standard setting is conducted every couple of years to affirm our assumption of the JQC and that it remains valid relative to things like changes in the curriculum or long-term candidate demographic shifts. Between standard settings, we use a process called equating. The equating process adjusts for any differences in the relative difficulty from one exam form to another, and then we apply that same MPS across the administration.
Now maybe you listen to that and it seems very clear to you and you have an interpretation of what specifically they mean by that, but to me and a few other people I've talked to, it's about as clear as mud. If they would have included just a little bit more information here, the whole video would make more sense. The uncertainty lies around whether, when he references adjusting, they are adjusting the difficulty of the exams after the exams have been given, or they're adjusting the minimum passing scores to compensate for relatively harder or easier test questions that were aggregated to create a CFA exam. Under the first scenario, which is adjusting the difficulty of an exam, we are left to assume that this simply means they're removing the easy questions from the scoring of those exams of relatively lower difficulty, resulting in a basket of more difficult questions and then a lower MPS. I believe that the same could work in reverse, where a relatively hard exam could have the hard questions removed to raise the MPS. And we know that the CFA Institute does this type of retroactive removal of questions from counting towards your final score based on the statement that they insert at the bottom of the page of every candidate's results. Under the second scenario, which would be the adjusting the minimum passing score higher when the exam questions are found to be easier, we should theoretically still see consistent pass rates since the exams with slightly easier questions would have higher minimum passing scores and an equal number of candidates would be able to clear it. But consistent pass rates has definitely not been what we've seen this year. So because of that, it seems more likely that the Institute is referring to adjusting the difficulty of the exams retroactively. We can't really be sure with just this explanation. And don't get me started on the infographic they provide. It seems to show exams being made more difficult, in turn lowering MPSs, and that does not reflect the reality that we've seen so far this year. Aside from considering those options A and B I just presented, a whole separate theory would be that the phrase exam form that they used in the video does not refer to exam form A versus exam form B in a specific CFA exam sitting, but rather it refers to handwritten exams versus computer-based exams in general. And that theory says that to reduce the likelihood of certain candidates getting lucky and guessing their way to passing a CFA exam since the total number of questions is slightly less on the CBT exams, the Institute reduced the total number of hard questions. And in turn, they would have increased the number of averagely difficult questions shown on every exam. This would allow the Institute to raise the minimum passing score since the average question difficulty would be lower. And this would also make it more difficult for students to take advantage of the greater variability of the types of questions you could see in a smaller sample size. So the problem with this video that the Institute released is that any of really those three theories could be derived from the information they gave us. Now you see why I said watching this video could make you more confused about how the minimum passing scores are being set than you were before watching it. In the other video that the CFA Institute released a few weeks ago, I felt like they shed some light on the uncertainty around what we were seeing in pass rates. This video, however, just creates more questions. Now I want to throw out a sort of unrelated tidbit here to say thank you to those of you who have stuck around to the end of this video. There are 1 or 2 projects in the work right now for future videos on this channel that, trust me, if you are watching this and you're a CFA candidate or charter holder and you watch content or read things online about updates and things going on with the CFA programs and you like to hear advice from some of the people out there who talk about CFA exams, you are definitely going to be interested to see the video or videos that I'll have coming on this channel in the coming months. So I'm not just fishing for subscribers here, but I'm serious. You should really subscribe down below if you haven't already so that you make sure you don't miss the upcoming content that I'm sure is going to be interesting to many of you. I know that I've been really excited just thinking about bringing it to the channel. If you're someone who's already subscribed, thank you very much for the support. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment down below. Maybe just tell me your interpretation of what the CFA Institute said in this video here. Like I said, it could be straightforward to some people. I just haven't talked to any of those people yet. Everyone I know who's watched this video comes away from it going like, what did they just say? Or what could this mean? It's just not very clear, but